All right, hey everyone, Jeff here at StopThePirates.blogspot.com. It's April 15th. It's tax day. I guess it's not really this year. I think you have till Monday to get your taxes in, 2016. But today a majority of Americans pay income taxes because, when they get a job, their employer requests that they fill out the IRS's W-4 form, which is a direct result withholds taxes from their paychecks for their labor. The majority has no clue as to why they're paying these taxes in the first place. Most people would say, well, it helps run the government, pay the, for the all of the handouts and everything for everybody, the welfare, but it's really just kind of a slave management system. I'll get into it here, and it's been affirmed that labor is a fundamental, unalienable right protected by the United States Constitution. This fundamental right is not supposed to be taxed. It is presumed that everyone is expected to know the law, and it has been long held that ignorance of the law is no excuse or a defense. And it's a maxim of law. He who fails to assert his rights has none. That unequivocally establishes that just as a closed mouth never gets fed, a matter must be expressed to be resolved. When it comes to dealing with lawyers, governments, and the Internal Revenue Service, which is not, by the way, an agency of the United States government, but it is a private, foreign-owned corporation, withholding and keeping knowledge from the people is nothing new. It is a common business tactic that has been going on from the beginning of its inception. It will most likely continue as long as we rely upon lawyers and government to do that which we ourselves should be doing. In order to find the answer as to why your labor is being taxed when the Constitution says it is not supposed to be, it is necessary to understand government, how the government exists and operates. To understand this really requires that you go back all the way to the Civil War. The people of this nation lost their true Republican form of government on March 27th, 1861, when 7 southern states walked out of Congress, leaving the entire legislative branch of government without a quorum. The Congress of the Constitution was dissolved for inability to disband or to reconvene. The Republican form of government, which the people were guaranteed, ceased to exist on that day. Out of the necessity to operate the government, President Lincoln issued Executive Order Number 2 in April of 1861, reconvening the Congress at gunpoint. In an executive emergency, martial law rule jurisdiction, which we are still under today. Since that time, there has been no de jure or sanctioned by law Congress. Everything functions under color of law, the appearance or semblance without substance or of legal right. Through executive orders under authority of the war powers, which i.e. is an emergency or the law of necessity. The law of necessity means no law whatsoever, as per such maxim of law as necessity knows no law. The law of forbidding killing is voided when done in self-defense. In time of war, laws are silent, which is a saying by Cicero. So we are under Emergency War Powers Act. That's why, well, I'll just get into this. To establish the underlying debt that the government owed to the bankers, the foreign bankers, which funded both sides of the Civil War, by the way. So it was kind of a false flag. I mean, they did it just so they could get their outcome, which was what we have today. And so they created to establish the underlying debt to the government and of the government to the bankers, to create corporate entities that are legally subject to the jurisdiction which they exist, and to create the jurisdiction itself correctly. The so-called fraudulent and unratified 14th Amendment was proclaimed and passed in 1868. This was a Sustake Trust, which is an operation of law incorporated in a military, private, international, commercial, de facto. The definition of jurisdiction, by the way, is that created by, belonging to the money power, existing within the emergency of the war powers. And the only operational jurisdiction since the dissolution of Congress in 1871 through the 14th Amendment, an artificial person, corporate entity, franchise entitled citizen of the United States, was born into private, corporate, limited liability, limited liability. So Section 4 of the 14th Amendment states, the validity of the public debt of the United States to the bankers shall not be questioned. You know, a lot of people will say the 14th Amendment freed the black slaves, but the truth of that matter is that they were already being freed through international treaties and things. And that was going out of the way anyway. And well, that's just, but it did outlaw voluntary servitude, or involuntary servitude, but it didn't outlaw voluntary servitude. So that's basically what you do when you sign under penalty of perjury that you are a U.S. citizen. So anyway, within the above referenced private jurisdiction of the international bankers, the private and foreign-owned Congress formed a corporation, commercial agency, and government for the District of Columbia on February 21st, 1871, Chapter 62, 16 Stat 419. This corporation was reorganized June 11th, 1878, Chapter 180, 20 Stat 102, and renamed the United States Government. This corporation privately trademarked names United States, U.S. capital letters, U.S., USA, USA, and America. When the United States declared itself a municipal corporation, it also created what is known as a cestui trust, a trust where one party receives benefits and use while legal title rests in another. To function under by implementing the federal Constitution of 1871, the incorporating the previous United States Constitutions of 1787 and 1791 as amended as by laws. Naturally, as the grantor of the trust, this empowered the United States government to change the terms of the trust at will. As evidenced under the Federal Constitution of 1871, the 14th Amendment, the people of the United States, without their consent, were declared citizens and granted civil rights. These so-called civil rights are nothing more than mere privileges which government licenses, regulates, and can be reinterpreted to suit its purpose at any time for any reason. The federal corporate government also conveniently somehow forgot to disclose to the people that the term citizen, which they have made every living and breathing inhabitant a subject, was defined by law as a vessel engaged in commerce. So in 1912, when the bonds that were keeping the U.S. government afloat and were owned by the bankers came due, the bankers refused to refinance the debt, and the colorable martial law rule Congress was compelled to pass the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. This act surrendered constitutional authority to create, control, and manage the entire money supply of the United States to a handful of private, mostly foreign bankers. This placed exclusive creation and control of the money within the private, commercial, foreign, and military jurisdiction of 1861 into corporate limited liability. America converted from the United States notes to Federal Reserve notes, beginning with the passage of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. Federal Reserve banks were incorporated in 1914, and in 1916 began to circulate their private corporate Federal Reserve notes as money alongside the nation's de jure, according to the law, currency, the United States notes. And you can still find those online if you go look them up, or pictures of the United States notes as opposed to Federal Reserve notes. The United States notes are actually warehouse receipts for deposits of gold and silver in a warehouse, which is a bank, thus representing wealth, substance, portable land, the money of sovereigns. The new fiat money, Federal Reserve note, amounted to bills for that which was not yet to be paid, i.e., for what was owed. For the new benefit of being able to carry around U.S. government debt instruments, Federal Reserve notes, in our wallets instead of gold certificates or silver certificates, we agreed to redeem the newly issued Federal Reserve notes in gold certificates or silver certificates, and also to pay interest on their use in gold only. Essentially, the Fed issued paper with pretty green ink on it, and we agreed to give them gold in exchange for the privilege of using it. Such was the bargain. And that's true, I think, back in those days when they first started doing this, they wanted all the interest to be paid in gold, so I'm sure that's where all our gold went, through the City of London. Through paying interest on the Federal Reserve Corporation in gold, the U.S. Treasury became progressively depleted of its gold. America's gold certificates, coin, and bullion were continually shipped off to the coffers of various European banks and power elite. In 1933, when the Treasury was drained and the debt was larger than ever, a financial condition known as insolvency existed. President Roosevelt proclaimed the bankruptcy of the United States. Every 14th Amendment citizen of the United States was pledged as an asset to finance the Chapter 11 reorganization expenses and pay interest in perpetuity to the creditors, the Federal Reserve bankers, and the national debt, which shall not be questioned. Remember that in the 14th Amendment. So on March 9, 1933, Congress passed the Amendatory Act, also known as the Emergency Banking Relief Act, to the Trading with the Enemy Act, originally passed on October 6, 1917, at a time when the United States was not in a shooting war with any foreign foe and included the people of the United States as the enemy. At the Conference of Governors held on March 6, 1933, the governors of the 48 states of the Union accommodated the federal bankruptcy of the United States Corporation by pledging the faith and credit of their state and to aid in the aid of the national government. Senate Document 43 of the 73rd Congress, First Session, 1933, did declare that ownership of all property is in the state, and individual so-called ownership is only by virtue of government, i.e., law amounting to mere user only. An individual use of all property is subordinate to the necessities of the United States government. Under House Joint Resolution 192 on June 5, 1933, Senate Report number 93549 and Executive Orders 6072, 6012, 6246, the Congress and the President Roosevelt officially declared bankruptcy of the United States government. Regardless, and we've had like 4 of them, so corporate bankruptcies last for 70 years. Regardless of the cause or reason, what many Americans either do not understand or have failed to seriously grasp is that the use of Federal Reserve notes, which is not a constitutional money designed under Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution, the people of the United States since 1933 have not had any constitutional lawfully way to pay their debts. There's therefore have not had any way to buy or own property. The people, for the benefits granted to them by the bankrupt corporate government, discharge their debts with limited liability using Federal Reserve notes. They have surrendered, by the way of unconscionable contract, their individual rights under the Constitution in exchange for mere privileges. So I did a video yesterday about a Constitution Con. You know, originally I think it was a good document, but what it really does is just it's kind of an IOU to the bankers. And anyway, this goes on for a little bit more. To review the countless United States Supreme Court decisions since 1938, landmark case, Erie Railroad versus Tompkins, 304 U.S. 64-92, clearly establishes that only the state has constitutional rights, not the people. The people have been pledged to the bankruptcy of 1933. The federal law administered in and by the United States is the private commercial law of the creditors, that due to the bankruptcy, every citizen of the United States is pledged as an asset to support the bankruptcy. That's where your statutes and codes come in. Because what you have to understand too is that the bankers out of the City of London, where the lawyers come from, the bar, the British Accredited Regency, and the inner temple um, they're all connected, so they're all one. So when you got a court, there's a monetary value based on all crimes are commercial, but the banks are the courts, and it takes a while to wrap your head around that, how that all works. But we're all sitting around going, "Hey, we're living in a free country," blah blah blah, but we're ruled over by private, foreign-owned corporation doing business as the United States. So, I mean, they've since bought everything. We can't do anything. We're really kind of regressing to being chattel debt slaves. But the federal law administered in the United States is a private commercial law of the creditors that, due to the bankruptcy, every citizen of the United States pledged bankruptcy. So you must work to pay the insurance premiums on the underwriting necessary to keep the bankrupt government in operation under Chapter 11 bankruptcy reorganization. That upon the declared bankruptcy, Americans could operate and function only through their corporate, colored, state-created, all capital letters name. That has no access to sovereignty, substance, rights, standing in law, or anything. The Supreme Court also held that general common law no longer is accessible and in operation in the federal courts based on the 1933 bankruptcy, which placed everything into the realm of private, colorable law merchant of the Federal Reserve creditors. To take this to a different level, and not only to explain why you pay taxes, but also why you do not own the house you live in, the car you drive, or anything else you think you've bought and paid for, etc. The state government and its creditors own it all. If you think you own your home just because you believe you paid it using those Federal Reserve notes, just like everything else you possess by permission of government, simply stop paying your taxes, your usury fees, your licenses, and see just how long it takes for the government and the creditors allow you to keep living in it before they come and take it away from you. I'm going to cut it off right there. Maybe I'll do a follow-up on this, kind of a series of videos, but I don't want to make this too long. Anyway, go to stopthepirates.blogspot.com. Have a great day.